Are the Baltimore Ravens truly gearing up to bring back some of their key 2024 free agents that are still available on the market? We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, and we are here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, as always, for being here today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen. Each and every day, as we are free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes an audio form wherever you get your shows. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, we are there for you wherever you'd like to tune in. And also in video form on YouTube. You can like this video, subscribe to the channel over there. We bring you 5 days a week of Ravens content. So Ravens news, analysis, updates, and a lot more 5 days a week. Plus, we do bonus content, live streams. We did a live stream yesterday, actually, after John Harbaugh spoke to the media at the NFL owners meetings, which will be some of the basis of today's show, but diving into a bit more of the headlines there. So really appreciate all the support. All of the everydayers, for the first-time listeners, and if you're somewhere in the middle, appreciate you too. Let's dive into this, though, because I think we have a jam-packed episode. In fact, I know we have a jam-packed episode because John Harbaugh spoke to the media at the NFL owners meetings, and he did reveal some very interesting comments and had some really interesting things to say, specifically about a couple of different topics. We're going to talk about those today. I think we have to start off with him talking about some of the free agents still left, Baltimore's free agents still left on the market. So that includes guys like J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Jadeveon Clowney, Kyle Van Noy, even Odell Beckham Jr. brought into that equation as well. We're going to talk about those guys in the first part of the show and if the Ravens truly are gearing up and how many guys they could potentially bring back from their players who are still on the market right now. Then in the second part of the show, we'll get into a more general aspect of what John Harbaugh had to say to the media. So moving away more from the free agents, talking about some of the other aspects. And then in the final part of the show, we'll get into the positional direction John Harbaugh had to talk about, the wide receivers, the offensive line. There's a lot to dive into there as well. So let's first start off with the Ravens and their free agents. John Harbaugh did say, so we'll start first with Jadeveon Clowney and Kyle Van Noy. Harbaugh said that there is optimism for him that both Clowney and Van Noy will be back in some capacity. So obviously for Baltimore, hopefully both guys are brought back. I think that'd be the best move for both parties. He said he's periodically texting with both those guys, but he's not sure their timetables to sign. Now, when he says timetables, there are a couple of things that come to mind for me. We know that Jadeveon Clowney, he likes to sign maybe a little bit later into the offseason because of the OTAs and the voluntary workouts and all that kind of stuff. We saw him sign about 3 weeks before the season started with Baltimore last offseason. So it would not shock me if, he's taken visits. He's gone to Carolina. He's gone to the Jets. But I'm not sure he's really in a rush. In fact, I doubt he's in a rush to sign. For Van Noy, I think it's less of a boat. I think he would sign early, but again, what if his timeline's I'm just going to take my time, fill out the options. If there's not a guarantee or something in the NFL, it's very hard to get. But if there's not any guarantee and Clowney's kind of not stringing you along is a bad term. I don't want to say that, but if he's kind of I don't know. If same thing with Van Noy. If he's I might go here, but I might resign and I might go there. You can't operate like that because there's a chance that burns you. And it's just the free agent pass rushing group has kind of dried up. I think Clowney and Van Noy are two of the best pass rushers now left because everybody's signing and everybody has signed. So at that point, you might have to go and see if you can just secure somebody because right now it's Odafe Owe, it's David Ojabo, it's Tavius Robinson, and that's about it. I mean, Malik Cam's somebody who can maybe contribute, but right now, Owe was solid for them last season. He's not fully in the circle of trust, in my opinion, but he's slowly working his way there. Ojabo is someone who is not in the circle of trust whatsoever. And then same thing with Tavius Robinson. I think that you have to be realistic if you're the Ravens and understand that you can't just go into the season with that and maybe a mid-round edge rusher. There has to be some veteran. I'd anticipate the Ravens bringing back at least one of Van Noy and Clowney. just because of the way that free agency has gone and how good both those guys were. Again, it would be ideal if they brought back both, and then you can kind of see what happens. Now, both Clowney and Van Noy are not long-term solutions. You would hope that that would be Owe and Ajabo, but you need a balance in this room right now, and right now there is no balance. So I think that the fact, Eric DeCosta has said he's kind of been in contact, and Van Noy on Twitter said that he's been in contact with DeCosta. So we'll see. Obviously, nothing's set in stone yet, but I think it is realistic that hopefully, again, I'm not saying anything's 100% done, but I'm hoping that one of Clowney or Van Noy will return to Baltimore, because I think it's just what's needed in both guys. There were some question marks about whether they would fit with the team, but both guys did that and then some, both on and off the field. Now, the other interesting comment here was about the running backs, both J.K. Dobbins and Dalvin Cook. John Harbaugh said he'd be happy to bring back either of those guys, either Dobbins or Cook, but if it can't happen, he's confident giving the young guys an opportunity. Now, my first thought about this whole comment was, who are the young guys? Like, Keaton Mitchell is your young guy, but, you're going to give him opportunities anyway once he comes back. He was that good for you last year for the Ravens. But, Justice Hill's not a quote-unquote young guy. He's on a second contract now. Derrick Henry, not a young guy. He's 30 years old. Is he talking about Owen Wright? Is there another running back that they're going to draft? Who are the young guys? But in terms of a guy like Dobbins or a Cook, this feels really weird to say. And I said this on yesterday's show. I said this on the live stream yesterday as well. It almost feels like Dalvin Cook is more likely to come back than J.K. Dobbins. And that feels really weird to say and has nothing to do with who I think is better right now. I think Dalvin and J.K. are both really good players, but it just feels like J.K. wants to go somewhere on a one-year deal, one-year prove-it deal, to show that, you know what, injuries do not define me. And, that's kind of his whole thing right now, I feel like. But in Baltimore, you can't really do that, because essentially you'd be the third running back. Technically you would be the second behind just Derrick Henry. But now this offense is going to shift its philosophy, because when JK was there, it was more so of like a committee with Gus Edwards and JK and Justice Hill and all those guys coming in. But with Derrick Henry, he's the bell cow. It's going to shift. I think that JK will want a bigger role than what Baltimore can offer him. And I just think both sides are looking for somewhat of a fresh start. But I think with Dalvin, there is a possibility for him to come back, slot in as your number 3 running back. And then once Keaton Mitchell comes back, it will be easier to slide him to a number 4 role as opposed to a JK. Now, do I expect either of them back? No. What I expect them to do is probably go and draft a late round running back anywhere from day 3 on. I said it on yesterday's show. Round 1, round 2, round 3, I'm not touching a running back if I'm the Ravens. Any other round on day 3? Hey, you know what? Go for it. I took Blake Corum in my mock draft yesterday. Some people loved it. Some people hated it. But I think that at 113 on, it's okay to do that. Just not a day 1 or day 2 pick. But that's what I think is going to happen. They're going to have a young guy who they draft in the later rounds. They're going to have him be the number 3 running back behind Derrick Henry and Justice Hill. Then when Keaton comes back from his injury, Keaton can slide back into his role, and that rookie running back can kind of move down and be the 4th running back on the roster. So, look, I'm sure that Baltimore, if that was the last case scenario and they had to bring back a JK or a Dalvin, I'm sure they wouldn't mind. They're both good players, but the Dalvin Cook experience was just really, really weird in Baltimore. I don't really know what to make of it, to be honest. I feel like even with JK, though, despite how weird that Dalvin Cook thing was, I think he just fits what Baltimore needs from a role perspective. I think when both are healthy right now, JK has all-world potential, right? JK has incredible potential, but the injury history is there, and we can't ignore the injury history, right? We can sing JK's praises, say he's awesome when he's healthy, but that's the asterisk, right? It's when he's healthy. And over the past couple of seasons, he just hasn't been, and that's been unfortunate. I feel like we were really robbed of the real J.K. Dobbins experience. I thought that he was on his way to being the best back in that class, even knowing what Jonathan Taylor's done to this point. I think J.K. was set to have that Jonathan Taylor breakout in year 2 before the injury happened. We have to remember, this guy averaged 6 yards a carry as a rookie on pretty significant snaps and led all running backs in that category, was 3rd in the league only behind Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray in that. So, again, what's done is done. It's unfortunate, but Derrick Henry comes in. He's your guy. Justice is your second guy behind him, and when Keaton comes back, he's going to slot into his role too. So what does it mean for those guys? It's going to be interesting. And then for Odell, John Harbaugh kind of honestly shut that door permanently. said that he loves Odell and, didn't necessarily say that he's going to be back. It was something more so along the lines of, hey, you know what? It's great. I earned a lot of respect for him. He said he's excited to give the Ravens younger wide receivers more of a look in 2024, though. And I mean, look, that's kind of the writing on the wall there. Again, Odell didn't live up to his contract. I get that. The Dolphins actually offered him a contract, so we'll see how that situation is. It feels like his options might be Kansas City and Miami, but we'll figure that out. But by the looks of it, and by Odell's farewell he posted last week, pretty much no shot he comes back, honestly. But coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk more about what John Harbaugh had to say, moving away from the free agent conversation, more so into other general comments. Stay tuned, a lot to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Gametime. There have been plenty of frustrating ticket buying experiences in my life. Sometimes I wasn't really sure if the seats were good. Other times I couldn't find last-minute tickets. Sometimes there are just no good deals at all. But you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event, because Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With good last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. The Gametime app, a ton of awesome experiences you can go through on there. Now, for Baltimore, Orioles opening day is literally this week, just a couple days away. It's been sneaking up on us for a while. It is finally here. Also, plenty of concerts in the Baltimore area as well. They have last-minute tickets on the app, flash deals, zone deals. Gametime also is the only ticket app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. They have all-in prices that show you the total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out. Plus, Gametime is obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on your tickets. With zone deals, you pick the section in Gametime, picks the seats for big-time savings. Hit the guesswork out of buying tickets with the Gametime. Down the Gametime app, create an account. Use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDON, spelled LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Gametime to the last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Taco Tuesday. Thank you so much for being here again. It means a lot to me, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every single day. Be sure to subscribe both in video form and in audio form. And we're diving into John Harbaugh's comments in the NFL owners meetings. Now, we did a live stream on this yesterday. That was more of an instant reaction to what he had to say. We're doing more general takeaways and breakdowns of the comments here. And we'll continue diving into specific topics more specifically during the next couple of episodes of Locked On Ravens, assuming no other big move happens. But let's talk more about Harbaugh's general comments in terms of what he had to say about a couple of other topics. And really, we can talk about positions, but I do want to save that more so for the final part of the show, because I want to talk about offensive line. We can talk a bit about other positions as well. But one really interesting comment that I think Harbaugh made is one about the draft and wide receivers. Now, again, we're going to talk more about wide receivers in the final part of that show. But for me, I think that for the Ravens, John Harbaugh saying Lamar Jackson's told the organization about a few of the wide receivers that he likes coming in out of the draft here. So this is interesting because, look, Harbaugh and the Ravens, they've been very open, especially with Lamar, in saying, you know what, we're a tandem here. We're a team. And we saw this last year where Harbaugh said that Lamar gave him a list of guys he loved. Zay was on that list. Zay Flowers was on that list. A lot of South Florida receivers. I'm sure Lamar gave him some South Florida receivers this time around as well. But Tank Dell was also on the list last year. And we also saw Lamar during his free agency say, hey, you know what? I'd like to play with Odell Beckham Jr. I'd like to play with DeAndre Hopkins. So Ravens went out there and got Lamar Odell Beckham. And look, they didn't have to do that. It kind of worked. But that was Baltimore saying, we believe in you, Lamar. We're going to bring in who you want. And this is our token of saying, we want you here. And if Odell was the reason that Lamar signed in Baltimore, it wasn't the reason, but I think it helped out. And so the fact that John Harbaugh, again, got that list from Lamar just shows how in tune the organization is in terms of it not being one guy with all the power and one guy making the decisions and it's one guy's input. Baltimore's always been an organization that values the opinion of everybody, and that includes the players. And I think that's how it should be, honestly, where if a player feels like a guy would be a good fit for him, there's at least a suggestion. This isn't Lamar taking over Eric DeCosta's job and saying, I'm in charge and I'm making sure that we're getting the guys I want. That's not what's going on. It's Lamar suggesting, and then John Harbaugh suggesting, Eric DeCosta suggesting. Obviously, Eric DeCosta has the final say because he's the general manager, but it goes to show that everybody's working in tandem. Now, one interesting point also, and this is general NFL stuff, but still relates back to Baltimore because John Harbaugh commented on it, is the hip drop tackle. Now, it actually relates back to the Ravens in terms of Mark Andrews. We all know that in that, I think, what was it, week 11 it happened? Maybe it was week 10. I think it was week 11. But whatever it was, week 10 and week 11, Mark Andrews gets hip dropped by Logan Wilson, the Bengals linebacker, effectively, essentially ending his season. I mean, he came back for the AFC Championship game, but was on a snap count and didn't really look himself or contribute all that much. But the hip drop tackle essentially is you're not running through a ball carrier, you're bringing down the ball carrier from behind, using your body weight, all of your body weight, and essentially coming down on your hip on the defender. And with that, legs usually get tied up in that process. For Andrews, it was his ankle. We saw Tony Pollard break his leg on a similar play. I think it was last playoffs, if I'm not mistaken, but Tony Pollard broke his leg on that. So it's a dangerous play, but at the same time, football's a dangerous sport. And John Harbaugh said that he was all for taking the hip drop tackle out of the game. But my thing is, how do you play defense nowadays? You know, Patrick Queen, former Ravens linebacker, obviously newly appointed Ravens villain with the Pittsburgh Steelers, said he can't wait to play two-hand touch now. And I mean, I kind of get it to an extent because they're policing all this defense out of the game. And how are defenders going to bring down players? I mean, look, if anything can help the safety of the players, I'm all for it, right? I get it, especially with the head injuries, those things being policed out of the game. I get it and I understand, and it's for the betterment of the players. But there have been so many other little things here and little things there, like on pass interference, a guy being too grabby here and grabby there. It's like you can't play defense anymore at the NFL level. It's just football in general, honestly. And a lot of defenders are wondering, yeah, you know what? The hip drop tackle, it's a dangerous play, but, you know, how else are we going to bring guys down? How else are we going to earn money if we can't tackle the way that we need to? So it's a very loaded conversation, I'd say, on both sides. But for John Harbaugh, he was all for taking it out. Speaking of Patrick Queen, John Harbaugh said he's excited about the opportunity that Trenton Simpson has and is going to have replacing for Patrick Queen, who he said was one of his all-time favorite people, saying that the next Ravens-Steelers game will give him a hug, and obviously is rooting for Patrick Queen, except when the Steelers play the Ravens. So that was interesting. And also, he said that he appreciates the efforts to get the kickoff return back in the game. If you didn't know, there are some rules being put out there about the kickoffs and getting those involved, like John Harbaugh said there. I don't know that I love the rules, but, you know, we'll get to those. The NFL actually put in a new rule with the challenges. If you win one of your two challenges next year, you get a third one regardless. So you don't get necessarily punished for the NFL's bad officiating as early as some teams did. So that, to me, is a really good, I think it was a solid rule changer, for being honest there. Now, other things that, just from a general Ravens perspective, Sashi Brown, the Ravens team president, also spoke to the media. And the most notable part of this, there were two actually, but the first one is that the Ravens have actually been in contact and have been expressing to the league that they have interest in hosting the draft, which I think would be a really cool thing for the city of Baltimore. Obviously, you know, with it being such a huge event and bring a lot of tourism into the city, Baltimore, I think, is a city that could really use it, and I think is more than equipped to host it. But obviously, there would have to be some maneuvering, I believe, with the MLB, with the Orioles, and some other things that would have to be settled. But I think it'd be cool. Like, I think that the city could do a lot with it. And, you know, the NFL draft's been moving around, and we'll kind of see what happens with it. But in my opinion, I think that Baltimore hosting a draft would be a really all-out cool experience for the city. Brown also saying the Ravens, like they have done, going with a ticket price increase for this year as the Ravens continue on their every other year plan. So that's kind of just standard protocol for the Ravens. But also, Sashi Brown saying that the Ravens are working on some change to the alternate uniforms, but weren't ready to reveal those plans. Maybe we'll get those later in the offseason. But he did say the organization feels the team has maintained a classic look with its main home road jerseys, doesn't plan to tinker with those as well. So we're going to figure out kind of what the Ravens do. I know a lot of people want a helmet. I talked about this on the stream yesterday. A lot of people want the classic, cool kind of alternate helmet that some of these teams are starting to get with the new helmet rules. I don't know if we're going to get that, but Baltimore should definitely do some jersey tweaks. It's been a while now. Mustard pants, I don't know about all that, But still, it's kind of cool to see the Ravens going and seeing, a draft and jersey potential updates. It's cool to see those things going on with the Ravens right now. Coming up, though, we will be rounding out the show about some positional updates John Harbaugh had to give, and if some of his stances are mistakes. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to here on the show. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. I have UConn personally. Again, games are going to be picking up in a couple of days for the Elite Eight, but I'm excited for it. Now, my Final Four is still in, but my bracket is all types of busted, so I guess I can't be bragging too much on that. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockdown and bet on college hoops and really cut down the nets. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Tuesday. Appreciate, again, everybody for being here with me. We are on episode 1,212 consecutively. Started this back up in 2019. So really appreciate everybody who has been there with me since day one. If you've been here with me for a while, maybe since the start of YouTube a couple of years ago, really appreciate that. Did a couple of years audio form only when I first started off the show. Then the network as a whole moved into video, and we've been going strong both in video and audio ever since. So you can catch us both in video and audio form if you want to watch one day, listen another. You have that total freedom to do so because it is the same show with audio and video. So Ravens news analysis updates, we're here for you. Tell a friend, tell a family member as well. We have their daily Ravens coverage right here on Locked On Ravens. Let's get back into the comments and the positional comments that John Harbaugh had to say. Let's start with wide receiver because I do want to dive into this. I think we're going to do a more specific episode on just this point alone. Coming up, we talked about it a little bit, honestly, over the weekend, a bonus episode about Rashad Bateman. So if you want a Rashad Bateman specific episode, what the feelings are around him right now in Baltimore, be sure to check that out under our bonus episodes and just in the audio feed where it's there on Saturday. But John Harbaugh essentially said, and kind of what I talked about with Odell, saying that he says, quote, I think we're going to be in great shape at wide receiver. Give those young guys a chance and see how they do, end quote. Now, the Ravens went through something similar in 2022 when they wanted to give their young guys a chance. And I guess it's similar in some ways and not similar in others. They gave their second-year wide receiver the keys to the clear #1 wide receiver role. Now, the difference between this season and what happened in 2022 a couple of years ago was that Zay Flowers proved last year that he has wide receiver 1 potential and that, he had that production. Bateman has great potential too, and he had that potential back in 2022, but he didn't necessarily prove it. And the Ravens essentially said, all right, here are the keys in the #1 wide receiver role. I had said it back then. You can go pull the receipts. It was a mistake to do that. And it backfired as such. Bateman got injured. Devin Duvernay, who was their effective wide receiver 2 with not a lot of proven experience, got injured. And it was just a disaster all the way around. Now, this time it has the potential to be different because, again, Zay has proven, he proved last season that he can be productive in that wide receiver 1 role. But the question for a lot of people is, well, what about trading for a Courtland Sutton type player to be that wide receiver 2 where Bateman can maybe slot into the wide receiver 3 and that can happen, or they can vote like a 2A, 2B. But doesn't seem like the Ravens are going that route. They brought in Michael Gallup. They brought in Josh Reynolds. Those players are to complement Rashad Bateman, not to take away from his role. So you can think that's a mistake. You can think that's the right move. You can believe in Bateman. You don't have to believe in Bateman. But the Ravens seemingly are going to probably sign some sort of a veteran at some point this offseason and then probably draft a guy, whether it's the first round, day 2, day 3. There's enough depth at the class, just the entire wide receiver class as a whole, where they can find somebody there. Now, to me, I would have liked to see them bring in a Courtland Sutton type player. Denver said they weren't trading Sutton, but the point stands of like a bigger bodied player who has that second wide receiver potential and that can work off of Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. While again, you can call it stealing Bateman snaps, but I think there is a balance between a team having veterans and having young guys and having those players work together as opposed to viewing it as a competition or guys just outright stealing guys snaps and targets and catches and touchdowns and yards and all that stuff. I think it can be the best of both worlds. Now, if Baltimore does opt to just go with Bateman and a veteran who's a 3 or a 4 instead of a 2 and a draft pick, they can still be okay. And part of that is because they still have Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely burst on the scene last year, but it seems like Baltimore wants to develop their guys. And I'll just try to give the perspective on what Baltimore's probably thinking here. They probably see the whole stealing snaps thing as if there's a player in front of you. If you're a young guy and there's a player in front of you, well, you can't develop guys that have guys in front of them. And I think that is, again, might not be the exact logic, but I do think that teams think that way a little bit. And I think there can be the best of both worlds, but I don't know. There's a lot of offseason left. Things can change, and we're going to see how it all plays out there. Now, one that surprised a lot of people was the backup quarterback. And, I think a lot of people are saying, well, it's not really a big deal if Lamar is out. Team is probably cooked anyway, which I tend to agree with. But John Harbaugh saying that he expects Josh Johnson to be the backup quarterback, and that he's excited to see Malik Cunningham and how he looks. So I think a lot of people thought Malik Cunningham was going to be the guy just because they signed him off the practice squad. There was a lot of hype, a lot of excitement around him. But I don't necessarily think this is the wrong decision coming out of the gate. Look, just because Johnson is the quote-unquote expected backup right now doesn't mean that we get to training camp and Cunningham doesn't blow the doors off, right? He could definitely blow the doors off and be dynamic, be electric, be explosive, and take that role from Josh Johnson. But Josh Johnson has very vast experience, probably the player who has traveled around the league the most now. But to me, the veteran behind Lamar, Josh Johnson, has been in the system. I think this is his fourth stint with the Ravens, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of him being re-signed and going and leaving and going and leaving. So, yeah, I think that for Baltimore, it doesn't necessarily shock me, but I think it did shock some people overall when it came to that. Now, going back to the edge position a little bit, we talked about it in the first part of the show. David Ojabo is healthy, expects a big breakout from John Harbaugh. That's the expectation from John Harbaugh, is that Ojabo will break out. They need it. They need an Ojabo breakout, especially if they're not able to get back Van Noy or Clowney. They're going to have guys step up, and Ojabo is that player. Oweh, I think we're looking for that full breakout. But for Ojabo, again, he's somebody that was drafted based off of his potential the last year at Michigan, but toward the Achilles at the pro day and then toward the ACL last season. Hopefully there's a lot of health and a lot of good sacks in his future. Now, on the offensive line, he talked about how the Ravens were in a tight cap situation. He attributed the Morgan Moses trade just being too tight against the cap, needing that flexibility. So I think the Ravens, in an ideal world, if they had it their way, they would have been able to keep Morgan Moses and bring back their starting tackles from last season. But again, it just didn't work out that way. And John Harbaugh also said that Daniel Falele would get a chance to win the right tackle job, and also said that saner heads prevailed and Patrick Ricard will be staying at fullback, not moving to the offensive line. And I said this on the stream yesterday. That agenda always seems to pop up out of nowhere in the offseason. And again, hasn't happened, but I think the Ravens have enough depth. They don't need a Ricard to play offensive line. But what I expect Baltimore to do is draft a plug-and-play tackle. I'm not saying Daniel Falele can't win that job. They could kick their plug-and-play tackle into guard for a season if Falele plays well enough. But this tackle class is just too good to ignore it. Right? You have a class like this. It's a great year to need offensive linemen in the draft. Baltimore needs offensive linemen. They lost 3 starters. This is a perfect opportunity for them. Plus, again, you can then attribute some of those other competitions, the guys like Ben Cleveland and Saleh and Andrew Voorhees, who John Harbaugh said is healthy at this point. So a lot of different competition, but I would expect Baltimore to draft at least 1 offensive lineman in this draft. Honestly, I wouldn't be mad if they drafted 3 offensive linemen in this draft if they stayed with 9 picks, a third of that draft being the offensive line with the way that they have it right now. I would not hate it. They've already lost 3 guys. They brought in Josh Jones, so I guess that is a body, but we're going to see how it all plays out for them this offseason. That's all I have here today on Locked On Ravens. So thank you so much for tuning in. Again, be sure to subscribe here, follow along both audio form and video form. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be right back here talking more Ravens content on the way. Stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.